Museum in Dallas and Auckland Castle in County Durham, in association with the Kimbell Art Museum in Fort Worth. The show marks the first time that this remarkable series of figures from the Hebrew Bible by the Golden Age Spanish master has traveled to the United States. In fact, the paintings have rarely left Auckland Castle in northeastern England, where 12 of them have hung in the dining room of the former bishop's residence for over 250 years. The 13th, Benjamin, joins his brothers from another collection in England. The current renovation of Auckland Castle and its transformation into a cultural center made this American tour possible. It's a great pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, Claire Berry, Director of Conservation at the Kimbell Art Museum, one of the most renowned conservators in this country and well-known abroad. She is often in New York and has many friends here. Before the installation of Jacob and his 12 sons in Dallas in the fall of 2017, these towering biblical heroes lined Miss Berry's laboratory in the Kimbell's iconic Louis Kahn building for almost a year. During that time, Miss Berry and her associates gave them a ground-up examination using X-rays, infrared reflectography, and pigment analysis to learn more about Zurbarán and his workshop's materials and practices and how they shaped the series. The results of the scientific study are presented in Miss Berry's seminal essay in the catalog, revisiting an Old Testament subject for the New World, uncovering the artist's process in Zurbarán's Patriarch series. She also co-authored 2 appendices, one with Rafael Barrientos Martinez on print sources, and the other on canvas weave with Don Johnson. The Kimbell team study is the most comprehensive analysis of a body of work by Zurbarán yet undertaken. Their findings were the centerpiece of a symposium last fall at the Meadows Museum, held in Miss Berry's honor. They are also the foundation on which our project rests. We owe her a great debt of gratitude as well for persuading the owner of the 13th painting, Benjamin, to let it join the family for both venues of the show. A graduate of the Cooperstown program in paintings conservation, Ms. Berry began her career with a fellowship at the Metropolitan Museum, working under the legendary conservator John Brealey. In 1984, she was hired as the Kimbell's first full-time conservator and was appointed director of the department in 2011. While concentrating on European paintings at the Kimbell, she also serves as the conservator of the American paintings at the nearby Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth and consults on Spanish painting at the Meadows. A widely published author, she's presented her many technical studies in books, journals, and documentaries. Her vast hands-on experience with paintings ranges from Fra Angelico to Georgia O'Keeffe and includes her much acclaimed restoration of Poussin's The Sacrament of Ordination, which entered the Kimbell's collection in 2011. Examining potential acquisitions for her own institution and for others is central to her work. As Michael Gallagher, the Metropolitan Museum's head of paintings conservation, said, Claire Berry's reaction to a work under consideration will often become a museum's weather vane of quality. Please join me in welcoming our good friend and esteemed colleague, Claire Berry.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you, Susan, for such a generous and gracious introduction. And I'd also like to extend my gratitude to Chief Curator Xavier Solomon and, of course, Director Ian Wardropper. I'd also like to welcome all the friends, conservators, and former colleagues from both the Met and the Kimbell who made the effort to be here tonight. One of the great delights of undertaking the technical study of Zurbarán's Jacob and his 12 sons for the exhibition was the opportunity to collaborate closely with senior curator Susan Galassi. Susan, your curatorial reputation speaks for itself, as we can see in the room next door. I feel that the discussions we had together in front of Zurbarán's paintings on our travels together throughout Spain and France with José Luis Colomer and a group of Spanish scholars were so fruitful. Also, I greatly appreciate your work on the conservation video shown here at the Frick. The presentation of the Patriarch series at the Meadows Museum last fall closely mimicked their hanging on the green damask walls of Auckland Castle. Seeing Jacob's sons at the Frick arranged in chronological order, together with their father's blessings, against a warm red background, provides a whole new experience, providing fresh insights into the portrayal of individual figures and the series as a whole. It's a great honor and pleasure to be with you here tonight to speak about the series Jacob and the 12 Sons by Zurbarán. With the addition of the painting of Benjamin from Grimsthorpe Castle, the entire series is happily reunited, as Susan has just said, enabling the first family outing of the complete series to New York, the second leg of its inaugural North American tour, which began at the Meadows in Dallas in September of last year. In the Paintings Conservation Department at the Kimbell, and here the paintings are as they're hung in Auckland Castle against the green damask walls. In the Paintings Conservation Department of the Kimbell, we're fortunate over the past several years to have maintained a long association with the Meadows Museum in Dallas in the care of its superb collection of Spanish art. Starting with a technical study on Fernando Gallego in 2008, I'm grateful to Director Mark Raglan for continuing and even expanding our association with the Meadows by inviting our department to undertake a series of technical studies connected to Meadows organized exhibitions. Mark has a special talent for seeing the potential that technical studies can provide in opening dialogues on Spanish paintings. It is thanks to Mark that our department joined this project to carry out the first comprehensive examination of Zurbarán's series, Jacob and His 12 Sons. Bill Jordan, the distinguished scholar of Spanish art and founding director of the Meadows Museum, who passed away this past January, was the instigator of the Kimbell's long collaboration with the Meadows Museum. Following his tenure at the Meadows, where with Algar Meadows, he built a first-rate collection, one of the very best collections of Spanish art outside of Spain, Bill served as deputy director and chief curator at the Kimbell for the better part of a decade. I had the pleasure to work with him then and throughout the years that followed. I believe that the best conservation work results from close collaboration between the conservator and the curator, and I was fortunate to work closely with Bill Jordan, one of the greatest scholars of Spanish art, on the restoration of many Spanish paintings that he brought to my easel over the past decades. This lecture is dedicated to his memory. The temporary closing of Auckland Castle for renovation, beginning in 2016, provided the opportunity for a comprehensive technical study of Zurbarán's Patriarch series, which, thanks to the fortuitous loan of Benjamin from Grimsthorpe Castle, can finally be examined, unframed, and in the Kimbell Conservation Studio as a complete series for the first time. Our study built on Gabriele Finaldi's 1994 groundbreaking article on the series that was published in Apollo, as well as the exhibition he organized to reunite the series at both the National Gallery London and the Prado in Madrid in 1994-5, at a time when the series still remained relatively unknown. The current exhibition, here shown as it was installed at the Meadows Museum in the fall of 2017, focuses primarily on an investigation of Zurbarán's workshop practice in the production of his ambitious Patriarch series. This was a commercial project dating from the mid-1640s that was possibly intended for export to the New World. The scope of the year-long technical study undertaken by me and my team in the Paintings Conservation Department at the Kimbell began in July of 2016, included complete documentation of the 13 canvases with infrared reflectography and X-radiography. Conservation scientist John Twilley carried out pigment, fractured sample, and cross-section analysis, with samples taken from Joseph and Zebulon using polarized light microscopy, scanning electron microscopy, and ultraviolet fluorescence examination. Our study also included comprehensive analysis and photomicrography of Zurbarán's paint handling using the stereo microscope, and a reappraisal of the print sources that Zurbarán referenced for the making of the series. In addition to gaining insights into Zurbarán's creative process, a major goal of our study was to document the condition of Jacob and his 12 sons, to prepare for the future cleaning and restoration of the series. Unfortunately, no conservation history for the series could be located in the archives at Auckland Castle. We only received brief anecdotal information from the castle regarding recent damages to both Levi and Asher. Levi's surface was dented when a shuttlecock being used by the bishop's children in a game of badminton in the dining room hit its surface. And Asher was damaged, unfortunately, when it fell from the wall onto a light and caused this long branch tear that you see here in the X-radiograph on the right that extends into the basket. While it would have been desirable to clean the paintings prior to the current exhibition, it would have been irresponsible to just clean one or two. And it just wasn't possible due to time constraints to take on the restoration of the entire series. As this detail of Asher's arm reveals, it was obvious that there were several condition issues that we needed to consider during our assessment of the paintings. We discovered that the folds in Asher's crimson sleeve, which here appear a little flat, had been heavily reglazed in the past during a previous restoration in order to compensate for the fading of the fugitive organic red lake pigment. Directly below this, the color of Asher's pale blue peplum had irreversibly changed to a mottled gray-brown due to Zurbarán's use of an inexpensive and unstable blue pigment, smalt. Yet other details, including Asher's woven scarf, the sparkling gold brooch, and especially the basket of bread, were much better preserved and retained much of their original intensity. The evident quality of the gold brooch, along with the economy of its execution, suggests that it was painted by Zurbarán himself. By contrast, the handling of the repetitive fleur-de-lis pattern in Asher's skirt appears less nuanced, inviting speculation that this part of the costume might have been assigned to a member of the workshop. But until the series is cleaned, we must be cautious about drawing too many definitive conclusions about the handling or any apparent weakness in the series, because we have to take into account the compromised condition and the possible strengthening of these areas in previous restoration campaigns. Currently, the varnishes of the Patriarch series show various levels of discoloration. While any future restoration of the series will likely involve all 13 paintings in a single coordinated campaign, in the past, some of the paintings were restored as individual works. Most of the skies are heavily overpainted. More worrying is the fact that some of the flesh tones and costumes were subjected to harsh overcleaning in the past. The chromatic balance of the works, typical for many 17th century paintings, has also been compromised by irreversible pigment changes due to Zurbarán's use of blue pigments, azurite and smalt, and the fugitive red lake pigment. Several details, such as the bows on Joseph's shoes, have been strengthened in a past restoration so that their present state represent an approximation of their original appearance. Benjamin, which was separated from the rest of the series when the paintings were sold at auction in 1758, has experienced a different restoration history from the 12 other canvases. Over the past 250 years, in Zurbarán's original painting of Benjamin, shown here, currently in the collection of Grimthorpe Castle, the color of his turban has changed significantly due to the fading of the red lake pigment. Bishop Auckland commissioned the artist Arthur Pond to create a copy of Benjamin here shown on the left, in the 18th century, so that he could complete the series at Auckland Castle. Today, I would like to examine the artist's studio practice as a gateway to understanding how Zurbarán produced this ambitious series as a commercial project. I will explore how he maintained a high level of quality control while also engineering a very efficient, streamlined painting technique at a time when his workshop was producing numerous large series intended for export to the New World. Although considered one of Caravaggio's most important followers in Spain, Zurbarán developed his own recognizable trademark style of painting. Largely self-taught as an artist, in 1614 he began 3 years of training in Seville when his father sent him there to apprentice with an obscure artist named Pedro Diaz de Villanueva, an artist of whom very little is known. In 1626, Zurbarán's contract to produce 21 paintings for the Dominican monastery of San Pablo in Seville within 18 months, 14 paintings depicting the life of Saint Dominic and other saints and the 4 doctors of the church, established his reputation as a painter. By 1629, Zurbarán's paintings had gained the artist such fame that the elders of Seville invited him to relocate permanently to the city, a great recognition of his status as a painter. Zurbarán's individual brand of tenebrism and civilian naturalism continued to secure his position as the most popular artist in Seville for a period of about 2 decades. The Patriarch series is one of numerous series of single life-size religious figures, including apostles or virgin saints, that Zurbarán and his workshop executed, often for export to the New World, throughout the 1630s and 40s. The vertical format canvases that Zurbarán chose for Jacob and his 12 sons, measuring roughly 200 by 100 centimeters, are slightly larger than the supports he used in the Lisbon Apostle series shown here. While the artist depicted the apostles before neutral, dark backgrounds, however, he placed the patriarchs in front of vibrant landscapes with expansive skies and low horizons. By positioning the patriarchs in a shallow space in front of low horizons, Zurbarán enhanced the perception of the figure's towering stature. Ribera adopted a similar pictorial device in his famous The Club-Footed Boy, 1642. We did see some variations in quality throughout the landscapes in the Jacob series. However, it's important to remember that the opacity of Naphtali's sky, here on the right, has been overemphasized due to areas of heavy overpaint. This results from a previous restorer's effort to minimize a network of craquelure that had developed in the background, exposing the underlying dark brown ground. The task of portraying the different individuals in the Jacob and his 12 Sons series required that Zurbarán engage the viewer's attention by presenting 13 unique poses. Rather than painting figures from life in the manner of Caravaggio, Zurbarán modeled the patriarch's diverse gestures and stances from print sources, as Gabriele Finaldi and others have written. Northern prints were greatly admired and utilized by 17th century painters working in Seville. Having knowledge and access to these prints also enhanced the prestige of the artist. Referencing these iconic images was a time-saving practice that ensured a high standard of quality. At first glance, Zurbarán's portrayal of Naphtali appears to be a near slavish imitation of Dürer's Christ from the Little Passion series. However, Zurbarán's studio practice involved a more hybrid technique that likely combined painting Naphtali's face and hands from life while modeling the patriarch's overall stance from Dürer's figure of Christ. Zurbarán repositioned Naphtali's proper right arm and likely consulted Schongauer's engravings of apostles, possibly either Saint Bartholomew or Saint Judas, to shape Naphtali's proper right hand. Adopting a hybrid technique that united different print sources with painting from a live model echoed an approach advanced by the 17th century civilian art theorist Francisco Pacheco, Velázquez's father-in-law and teacher. In Book 3 of his treatise on the practice of painting and all its uses, Pacheco wrote, "While artists have some figure to paint, they should choose things from prints, drawings, or paintings, a head from one, a half figure or two from another, arms, legs, draperies, and unite them in such a way that they form a pleasing whole from the various parts." We did not uncover any evidence of underdrawing in our examination of the 13 patriarch canvases through infrared reflectography or examination under the stereo microscope. Furthermore, Zurbarán left no drawings or studies of these paintings. His studio practice, however, must have involved a preliminary drawing phase, since the evidence suggests that he meticulously designed the 13 patriarch figures prior to painting. Although we have no direct evidence of how he transferred his outlines of these figures onto the prepared canvases, Pacheco wrote that it was common for 17th century civilian artists to draw directly on the ground layer using gesso or chalk. And for life-sized or larger pictures, Pacheco recommended fastening a piece of chalk to a cane to outline the figures. These chalk outlines would have largely disappeared during the painting process. The proper delineation of the figure was something that Pacheco emphasized. Note the sinuous line that Zurbarán creates for Asher's profile that begins with the repetitive pattern of drapery folds at the top of his turban and continues through the profile of his face, here rendered in half shadow and set off against the bright sky, and then even on to the ribbon loops. The luminous still life of bread loaves in Asher's basket, it's a high point of the entire series, undoubtedly painted by Zurbarán himself. Zurbarán's depiction of the loaves against the bright background sky highlights their crisp outlines and asymmetrical arrangement. Portraying the bread loaves in raking light emphasizes their volume and three-dimensional form. Note the contour Zurbarán creates using Asher's fingers and hand that grasp the bread basket. His fingertips almost read as an extension of the basket weave. Zurbarán's portrayal of Issachar, another one of the patriarchs depicted in profile, with his arched back and large red backpack, also reflects the artist's preoccupation with the proper delineation of the figure. Zurbarán added Issachar's proper right hand as an afterthought. You can see here in these details that it was painted on top of the already completed sky. This was the only pentimento found in Zurbarán's depiction of hands in the Patriarch series, but it doesn't represent a change as much as it represents an addition that helps guide the eye to Issachar's face and helps balance the counterweight of the backpack. Evidence from our examination of the series through X-radiography suggested that Zurbarán, once he predetermined the patriarch's poses during a preliminary design phase, generally left their contours as designed without any major changes during the painting process. We might see some slight shifts in the outlines of the drapery, but little more than that. This reinforced the impression that Zurbarán developed their overall poses using a hybrid technique based on prints rather than posing from live models or instinctively painting from life. Zurbarán did not attempt to capture spontaneous movement or momentary gestures. Rather, he produced 13 static and emblematic figures. Once again, his studio practice seems to follow Pacheco's advice to carefully plan figures prior to painting. Quote, "I will not follow the careless advice that allows the painter to assail the canvas by drawing the idea for some figure directly upon it without any other preparation," end quote. This X-radiographic detail of Joseph's hand shows Zurbarán's very deliberate treatment of this hand without any hesitation or changes. Although Zurbarán was influenced by Caravaggio's revolutionary technique of chiaroscuro painting, he departed from Caravaggio's practice of painting figures directly from life. During examination of Caravaggio's card sharps at the Kimbell Art Museum, infrared reflectography revealed that the artist first rapidly blocked in, then spontaneously repositioned the young cheat's card-pulling hand. The apparent speed with which he made the change suggests that he was working in front of the live model. And Zurbarán's contemporary Guercino, an Italian follower of Caravaggio working in Bologna, executed the Kimbell's Christ and the Woman of Samaria in 1619-20, a painting indebted to Caravaggio's naturalism and chiaroscuro lighting. X-radiography revealed Guercino's obsession with readjusting the position of Christ's proper right hand, a focal point of the composition. There's a palpable sense that Christ is gesturing with his outstretched hand while conversing with the Samaritan woman. X-radiography of the patriarch paintings revealed that Zurbarán employed the inexpensive plain weave canvas taffeta throughout the series. This was the canvas weave most commonly used in 17th century Seville. During the mid-17th century, there were artisans designated as preparers of canvas, and it was a common practice for apprentices to store primed canvases in the workshop waiting to be used. Relying on colormen or workshop assistants to systematically stretch and prepare his canvases, a purely manual activity, freed Zurbarán to focus his attention on the more intellectual or creative aspects of his painting practice. Through canvas weave analysis with Don Johnson, we discovered that the 13 paintings derived from 3 cliques or groups of 6, 5, and 2 canvases each, suggesting that ample canvases were prepared with the production of a large series in mind. The canvas weave maps reflected a somewhat quirky method of stretching that we noted throughout the series. And this would be interesting to compare with other canvases emanating from Zurbarán's workshop. Examination of several cross-sections taken from Joseph and Zebulon using polarized light microscopy, ultraviolet fluorescence, and the scanning electron microscope confirmed the presence of a 2-layered brown ground comprised of brown iron earth that is characteristic of the earth found in Seville, Sevillian earth ground. This was considered the best and smoothest priming at its time. A clear difference in particle size was seen between the upper and lower ground layers. The aim of the coarser lower ground was to fill the canvas weave and create a stable base layer, while the upper layer consisted of much finer particles to create a smoother, even surface for painting. The ground samples from Joseph and Zebulon shared the same structural features and most of the same uses of material, pointing to consistency in ground preparation throughout the series. As Sani Vélez discussed in her article on Zurbarán's Christ and the Virgin in the House of Nazareth from the Cleveland Museum of Art, composing a picture by arranging dark and light areas was the prevailing trend in Spain when Zurbarán was active as an artist. The opaque underlying of light areas over the dark ground, called chiaroscuro underpainting, was an essential part of this method. During her examination of the Cleveland painting, Vélez discovered that, prior to painting, Zurbarán outdefined the shape and contour of Mary's robe using an opaque, warm tan preparatory layer that was applied over the brown ground. This light, warm underlayer enhanced the luminosity of her crimson robe. Similarly, he painted Jesus' drapery over a cream-colored base tone that canceled the effect of the underlying dark brown and heightened the radiance of his ultramarine blue robe. Joyce Plesters, during her examination of St. Margaret on the left at the National Gallery, London, discovered thin layers of gray-brown or blackish-brown paint, either noticeably lighter or darker than the ground itself, underlying various areas of local color. This suggested to Plesters that Zurbarán executed a monochrome undermodeling prior to painting to aid the artist in establishing the light and medium tones as well as shadows for the painting of St. Margaret. In our examination of the Patriarch series, we found that while Zurbarán painted the flesh tones and skies directly over the brown ground, he applied selective toned underlayers beneath different colored costumes. He painted Joseph's once lavender brocaded coat over a cool gray base tone, which is now completely exposed here on the left due to the fading of his original pigments. So we're actually seeing the underlayer in Jacob's coat, the gray underlayer. And he also painted Joseph's cool crimson drapery on the right over a similar cool gray underlayer, which has now become more emphasized with the fading of the red lake pigment. For Zebulon's multicolored striped pants, Zurbarán selected a sienna-toned underlayer, more appropriate for the warmer palette of Zebulon's clothing. The artist used the warm base tone to enhance the tonality of the colors and also to impart a sense of volume to the pants. Note how he abruptly ends the bright yellow stripes, allowing the exposed sienna base tone to suggest the curve of the fabric as it goes into shadow. Here. Zurbarán accomplishes such a convincing illusion of form and fabric using the simplest of means. By contrast, Zurbarán painted the Patriarch's flesh tones directly onto the brown ground, the civilian earth ground. He uses the exposed ground to create the shadow and a sense of volume along Jacob's smallest finger. Zurbarán's use of selective undertones was an essential part of his studio practice, as seen in the Adoration of the Magi from 1639 to 40 from the museum in Grenoble. Here we see Zurbarán differentiating between the flesh tones of the gray-haired Magi and the Christ child by using different toned underlayers. He painted the older Magi's flesh tones directly over the dark brown ground, which you can see here in the shadows, but modeled the infant's skin over a cool gray base tone that is also visible in the thinly painted shadows. X-radiography of Levi yielded the unexpected discovery of the head of a virgin with a light background blocked in beneath the patriarch's legs. The earlier composition was abandoned, and the canvas was flipped and recycled to create the painting of Levi. Was this evidence of another earlier abandoned series, perhaps an apostolato series, which would have included typically figures of the Virgin and Christ? Results of canvas weave analysis support the idea of a rejected series, revealing that the canvases for the Patriarch series were bought and prepared in bulk. The quality of execution of the Virgin's head suggests that Zurbarán himself was responsible, and that he started the composition with the head. This finding also sheds light on the likely sequence that he followed in his studio practice, which was reinforced by our direct examination of the paint surfaces. After painting the flesh tones, Zurbarán blocked in the skies and the landscapes, followed by the clothes and the decorative details, and ending with the final retouching of the paintings. Zurbarán modeled Jacob's flesh tones by using a simple, abbreviated technique in which he contrasted the lighter flesh tones with exposed areas of the dark brown ground to suggest the shadows and wrinkles of the patriarch's weathered face. Zurbarán's streamlined technique of using raking light and dark and light contrasts to create a sense of three-dimensional relief was highly efficient compared to the Renaissance practice of modeling form in a more generalized light with the meticulous application of glazes. Zurbarán's innate skill as a painter is seen in his seemingly rapid portrayal of Jacob's hooded eyes. After feathering in the flesh-colored paint around areas of exposed ground, the artist added simple black slits for the eyes and a few wispy brushstrokes for Jacob's brows. This detail of Joseph, the second to last of Jacob's sons, reflects the artist's ability to employ the same economical techniques of chiaroscuro painting to portray the smooth skin of a rosy-cheeked youth. Joseph's mustache is suggested by exposing the brown ground and little else. To create the halftones in the shadows beneath Joseph's eyes, Zurbarán dragged a dry brush over the dark ground. The contrast of Joseph's shadowed brow, comprised of the exposed brown ground, emphasizes the intensity of the patriarch's fixed open stare. Once again, Zurbarán used an extremely efficient technique to model the lids, eyes, and highlights using just a few simple strokes. These details illustrate a type of energetic zigzag brushwork that we found in passages throughout this series that we felt could only be ascribed to Zurbarán himself. The freedom in handling seemed to reflect the work of the master engaged in the act of creating. On the left, we see Zurbarán roughly blocking in Jacob's beard prior to adding the fine strands of gray with finishing brushwork. We found similar zigzag brushwork on a much finer scale in the modeling of Issachar's flesh tones on the right. Zurbarán began to paint Simeon's striped sash by applying a preliminary layer of vermilion paint, then created the folds by pulling in dilute brown glazes. Using a stiffer paint, he employed a rapid shorthand technique to apply the colored stripes of the sash. From a distance, these short dashes of brushwork read as continuous lines of color. The artist recycled one template to create the brocade pattern draperies of Dan, Judah, and Levi, but used different color contrast to differentiate the three costumes. The photomicrograph of Dan's drapery on the right shows the sharp edge of the blue paint here, suggesting that the artist applied the brocade pattern with the aid of a template. Zurbarán's mastery of the handling of light can be seen in this treatment, in his treatment of minor details in Zebulon's costume. Starting with a thinly applied taupe base layer for the shadow, he modeled the dangling string in Zebulon's shirt using a single brushstroke, loaded with lead white paint. The downward pressure he applied to the brush produced thin ridges of white paint along the edges of the string that read as highlights. The artist's efficient use of chiaroscuro modeling can also be seen in his treatment of Zebulon's red button. He established the shadows first using dilute black paint, and then applied the juicy, bright vermilion paint with apparent speed, shaping, texturing, and highlighting the button in just one final step. Zurbarán's handling of the elaborate gold embroidery of Joseph's coat, which, like all of the patriarch's embroidered borders, were based on clear designs, is a tour de force. Close examination of the embroidery, applied during the final stages of painting, reveals the simplicity and the directness of the artist's technique. He rendered these details using a simple two-step process. After laying in a dilute taupe paint for the shadow, he selectively added the lead tin yellow highlights using a stiffer paint. Zurbarán's control of the brush and mastery in the handling of highlights creates the convincing illusion of glittering gold threads in three-dimensional relief. The artist employed the same two-step process in the handling of the embroidered paisley pattern along the border of Joseph's coat. The artist applied lentin yellow highlights to create the fringe, using tiny, irregular dashes of paint that conveyed both the sparkle and subtle movement of the gold threads. The simplicity of Zurbarán's technique is conveyed in his treatment of Joseph's bejeweled, pearl-encrusted brooch. He creates each of the pearls by applying 2 dabs of paint for highlight and shadow over a gray base tone. Although X-radiography of the Patriarch series did not reveal any pentimenti in the poses of the figures, it did bring to light 3 significant changes or additions to narrative details that Zurbarán made in a late stage of painting, at a point when he could have assessed both the individual figures and the series as a whole. He added a much fuller beard to Zebulon's face, covering his scraggling neck and softening his weathered appearance. With this change, Zurbarán modified Zebulon's appearance to more closely resemble that of Degane's portrayal of the patriarch in this print. In the foreground of the painting of Levi, Zurbarán added a temple over the completed landscape at lower left, covering a slender tree with the cupola of the building. Perhaps the artist felt it was necessary to clarify Levi's identity as a Jewish priest with the addition of the temple. Evidence of the artist's characteristic zigzag brushwork used for his initial blocking in is visible in the interior of the temple. The artist also added loaves of bread to the pile of Asher's basket to produce a more ample and asymmetric heap. Because the 12 patriarchs were viewed as predecessors to the apostles, they were the Old Testament precursors to the 12 apostles, this adjustment highlights a key iconographic detail symbolizing the Eucharist and the bounty of Christ's blessing in the New Testament. These additions also place greater emphasis on what is one of the most beautiful passages of the entire series that showcases Zurbarán's consummate skill as a still life painter. Close examination of one of the added loaves of bread shows how Zurbarán textured the crust by gouging into the still wet paint with the end of his brush, exposing the brown ground, which is also visible in some of the open craquelure on the right. We discovered that the artist also carved into the wet paint of the river in Issachar's landscape, using the exposed brown to sculpt the branches along the riverbank. This discovery links Issachar's landscape directly to the master's hand, upsetting the notion that the landscapes were exclusively given to workshop assistants. We found variations in the quality of the landscapes in the Patriarch series. Here are two of the better quality landscapes. Nuances in the handling of light on Asher's wheat field and the thatched building on the left suggests that these passages were possibly painted by Zurbarán himself. On the right, the artist's handling of light on the rocks and water, coupled with his technique of sculpting the tree branch, also links this landscape to Zurbarán. But when we compare Naphtali's landscape on the right to Asher's wheat field on the left, we see perhaps differences in the level of quality, particularly in the handling of the thatched buildings, with the one on the right appearing slightly more generic, possibly the work of a workshop assistant. In conclusion, we believe that Zurbarán's studio practice is a fundamental aspect to consider when discussing his place in Spanish Golden Age painting. Taking cues from Caravaggio as well as Northern prints, Zurbarán developed his own marketable brand. He produced large-scale series for important religious commissions in Spain, such as Guadalupe, while also tapping into the export potential for transatlantic trade with the New World. By employing a studio practice that relied on highly developed fixed compositions and exploiting the expressive potential of toned underlayers and chiaroscuro painting, Zurbarán was able to paint very quickly. He abbreviated the painting process when it came to the addition of decorative elements such as gold embroidery and pearls, which are some of the most striking features in the Jacob and his 12 Sons series. Zurbarán's streamlined technique enabled him to position himself as a prolific painter and guarantee his commercial success through the efficient production of monumental series. Looking at the paint surfaces themselves, we see variations in handling. However, we found that Zurbarán was actively involved in realizing the series at several different stages. We see him blocking in forms, using rapid zigzag brushwork in an early stage of painting. We also see his hand in the fully worked up flesh tones and in iconographic changes, such as the addition of bread loaves to Asher's basket. Zurbarán's hybrid approach to composition, coupled with his proficient, systematic method and expert handling of the brush, are key to understanding his work. Jacob and His 12 Sons is an example of the artist's consummate vision, a workshop-oriented approach that includes significant hands-on involvement of the master. Thank you very much.